We're running?
Yeah, we're running.
Okay.
So, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
So, you're running for
Mayor of New Britain,
Mayor
yes.
of New Britain. And give us a little background.
Okay. I moved to New Britain in 1989, raised a couple of great kids here who both went through New Britain High School and have now gone on to college. I first got involved in stuff in town when my daughter was in second grade, and we heard that her school was going to lose a couple teachers due to budget cuts. And this was at the end of a PTA meeting as we're putting away the chairs. And my reaction was, why didn't we talk about that during the PTA meeting? And what I was told was, oh, well, we don't do politics. Well, if the PTA doesn't do school budget politics, who does? Nobody had an answer. So I basically said, if nobody else is doing it, I need to go organize parents. So I did. I took about 80 parents down to City Hall, where we told the City Council that budget cuts for the schools was unacceptable, and miraculously they came up with some more money, and we didn't have layoffs the next year. That was sort of my start in things in New Britain. I got invited to a meeting at the Community Foundation, which I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. Walked into a room full of women and was like, okay, am I in the right place? Everybody then introduced themselves as either working for the school district or running a child care center, and I was still wondering, was I in the right meeting? And they started talking about preschool. I had a son in preschool, so I had sort of some understanding of what they were talking about. And then a week later, the same person who had invited me to the meeting called me up and said, hey, can you come down and sign the grant proposal?
Can you come down and
sign the grant proposal? What do you mean sign the grant proposal? Well, when I got there, there was a place for the mayor, a place for the head of for the superintendent, the head of the school readiness council, and a parent leader. And so I was their parent leader because I'd organized against school budget cuts. That they eventually got that grant, and then they needed to hire somebody to run the organization, and I ended up being the person who got hired to run the Early Childhood Collaborative. It was originally called the Discovery Collaborative, then it became the Early Childhood Collaborative, and then eventually now it's morphed into the Coalition for New Britain's Children. But in the course of that, we focused on why was it that New Britain had the lowest rate of kids going to preschool in the state. And I remember people sitting around scratching their heads trying to figure out, what was going on here, and coming up with all sorts of ideas that didn't really ring true to me. So I went out and called CCSU and asked them, what would it cost to enroll a freshman as a commuter, with tuition, books, all that sort of stuff? And I came back into the room and said, I think I have a different answer. I'm spending more to send my son to the CCSU preschool than I would be spending if he was a freshman in college. And there's financial aid as a freshman in college. The reason why parents aren't sending their kids to preschool is because they can't afford it. And so the answer is not like, let's persuade Latino parents that it's a good idea to send their kids to preschool. No, let's figure out a way to get some subsidy dollars in here so that parents can afford it. So that then led to an effort to train parents to become advocates, and so we ran several rounds of parent leadership training, and then bringing legislators in and telling them about the need. I remember a wonderful meeting with a room full of Spanish-speaking parents, talking with legislators through a translator back and forth, and legislators going, I think that's the first time I've been in a room full of 70 or 80 Spanish-speaking parents telling me that this was something that they needed. And over time, through a combination of advocacy to get the funds in and work with the providers, the child care providers, to prepare to absorb new subsidy dollars, being able to substantially add to the number of preschool slots we had, so that we're now able to have about as many kids in New Britain going to preschool as a percentage compared to the rest of the state. So that was kind of how I got involved in stuff. After 10 years as the director of the Early Childhood Collaborative, where I also worked on doing a community blueprint for young children, where we looked at 5 different indicators of child well-being and looked at the trends, looked at what were the stories behind those trends, and how do we then turn the curve, go from a bad trend to a good trend. That whole effort has led to a lot of work since then. One of the things that we did in my sort of final years here was to join the Grade Level Reading Campaign, which is a national effort led by the Casey Foundation that focuses on getting kids to reading at grade level in 3rd grade. Because after that, the way our school systems across the country work is that for the first several years, we're teaching you how to read. But then by about 4th grade, we expect that you can read, and you now start to read for content. If you can't read for content, then you're falling further and further behind. So we have lots of kids going into high school who are reading at a 4th, 5th, 6th grade level, and it makes it really, really hard in high school. So the Grade Level Reading Campaign decided to focus on 3 areas. The first was kindergarten readiness, because if kids start behind, they're always trying to catch up. The second was attendance, because when kids are missing a lot of school, they're falling behind. And then the third is summer learning loss, because, kids in Farmington are going to, science and music camps. They're doing stuff during the summertime that is contributing to their learning, where kids in a poor city like New Britain, a lot of them are sitting around watching TV and not doing it, and there's not really any stimulation. So they're suffering summer learning loss. So the Grade Level Reading Campaign actually has this little exercise where you line 3 people up and you say, okay, so you're the first one, you're the upper middle class parent. Take 3 steps forward because you've gone to great preschool. And then, okay, so now all of you are in kindergarten, take 1 step forward. And then, okay, so, second person, you've missed 15 days of school, actually 20 days of school. Take 1 step backward. And, and then everybody take another step forward because you've gone through another year. And then, this person, the third person, they didn't do anything in the summer. So you end up seeing very dramatically over time how the upper middle class kid is further ahead than the kid who's missing a lot of school, the kid who didn't get to go to preschool, kid who doesn't ever get to do any kind of summer enrichment programs. So we joined that campaign. We focused, when we looked at our numbers, we realized that 29% of our kindergartners were chronically absent, and realized that was a huge problem. And really, as a community, decided to focus on that. The Community Foundation and the United Way and American Savings all contributed to an effort where the school district really focused on the kindergarten class.
The issue.
Yeah, and so the key change was that we went from a system where the school district was focused on truancy to, which was sort of a punitive approach. You've missed 10 days of school, we send you the letter that says, you are approaching becoming truant, you must get your child to school or we're going to call DCF kind of thing. To, and that letter could be coming out in October if the kid's missed 10 days of school in September, or it might be coming out in April after the kid has missed 10 days over the course of the year. There's a group called Attendance Works, which works closely with the Grade Level Reading Campaign, and they said what's really important, the indicator is when kids miss 10% of the school year. And you need to be looking at things from the very beginning. So after the first 2 weeks of school, there have been 10 days. If a child's missed 1 day of school, they've missed 10% of the school year so far. You need to intervene then to get them back on track. Because if you let them go for the first 2 months of school and they've missed 10 days, they're already so far behind that they may not catch up. So we changed from this, okay, a secretary looks at how many kids have, missed more than 10 days and then sends this, tells the social worker to send a letter home, to now every 2 weeks there's a meeting that includes the school social worker, the teachers, leadership of the school, to look at the attendance data and say, okay, so, Johnny's missed 3 days here. What's going on there? What have we done so far? Has anybody been in touch with mom? What's going on? And, someone says, he was in the emergency room with asthma. Okay, school nurse, do we have an asthma plan for him? Does he have a nebulator here? Can we do things that, can help help him manage his asthma so he can be in school? And, Mom would certainly much prefer to have him getting his, asthma inhalers done at school than having to take him to the emergency room. So you go through and you look at each case one at a time, and when you haven't been able to fix the problem through, a couple of phone calls, then the district has a couple of part-time people who go out and do home visits. And there, there's a little bit of an assessment done. I mean, and I've heard stories of, I arrived at the apartment and they're sitting in the dark, the power's been turned off, all 3 kids are there with mom, they're just kind of huddled in the corner. Mom is clearly suffering from depression. This family needs real help. Okay, so the answer is not like call DCF on her, the answer is to help her find some help.
Absolutely.
And so they kind of borrowed, the school's attendance officer borrowed stuff from the juvenile justice approach, which was when you have a family that's got real problems, they bring them before a group of all the social service providers and say, okay, so tell us your story and let's see how we can help you. And that approach that makes it so those hardest cases are not just the school district's problem. It's we bring in all the people who might be able to help in the community to help those families. So that's been a big change that's come out of that work that I started with the Early Childhood Collaborative. And there were a whole lot of other people involved in that. Joe Vavracek at the school district has been really good at leading that effort within the school district. The summer learning loss piece was really adopted by the United Way, and they have helped the school district set up a system where you have the traditional summer school in the morning, and then in the afternoon there are enrichment programs. So the kids are getting to pick, I want to do theater, I want to do photography, I want to do karate. And it's essentially been a rebranding of summer school. When we were little, summer school was, something you kind of got punished for, because you failed, you now have to go and now you're like being invited to the summer enrichment program. And you're getting some learning in the morning, and then that learning is being reinforced in the afternoon with the work that you're doing, with the creative stuff that you're doing. But what we found is that those kids who went through the summer enrichment program, their attendance improved. Because they felt more connected to the school.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's some of the stuff that I've done here in New Britain. That project has already been working, but I think there are other problems that the city faces that we can use the same kind of approach of get a group of people together, look at the data, try and understand the story behind that data, and then devise strategies to address it. So,
Gotcha.
One of the things that I've seen in some parts of the city is that there is a accumulation of properties that are in foreclosure or where the property owner is underwater because the value of the property has not regained, has not come back up after the Great Recession. Within my neighborhood, there are 4 buildings that have been in foreclosure. One of which is being flipped. It's been renovated, got a for sale sign. That one seems like that one's doing pretty well. There's one that's boarded up, and there are 2 that are empty. And as long as those empty buildings have the front lawns mowed and stuff so that it's not obvious, I see it's empty because I notice there are no electric meters there, and there's but for somebody else on the block who has the house for sale, If the grass is 3 feet tall, it says to any potential buyer, this is a iffy neighborhood, I don't really want to buy here. So we need to figure out, how do we clear up that backlog of foreclosed properties? How do we encourage resident home ownership as opposed to absentee ownership? There are parts of this city where they're undergoing a conversion from home ownership to absentee ownership, and particularly near the college, where you have seen neighborhoods change because all of a sudden it's not resident homeowners taking care of the properties, it's absentee owners renting to lots of college students who are having parties in the middle of the night. Yeah, well, I think the approach of bringing people who have some stake in something together to, first of all, jointly understand the problem, understand how we measure that problem, and how we would be able to tell if we were making it better. What would be the indicators that say we're making progress? And then what are the best ways for us to put in place a plan that will make progress? And we can do that on lots of different things. It's not just education issues. One of the things that lots of people tell me when I'm out knocking on doors is that downtown isn't, well, it's not anything close to what it used to be back in the 60s or 50s and 60s, when there were a couple of movie theaters and all that sort of stuff.
All over the place.
But I remember when I first moved to New Britain going down to Middletown, and Middletown was very much like downtown New Britain, a bunch of empty storefronts, not really much reason you'd want to go there. And now if you look at Middletown, it's really transformed. It was because there was an intentional effort by a group of community organizations to turn that into a restaurant district. And so that meant recruiting restaurateurs. It meant making sure that the landlords weren't renting the storefront next to a nice restaurant to a pawn shop. And it's just you've got to figure out, how do you make this. Everybody's got to be bought into the idea. So that property owner who's got a vacant storefront who really wants to rent it to somebody will pass up the pawn shop in favor of the guy who wants to rent it as a restaurant, but who's a couple months away from being able to move in, that sort of thing.
For the whole structure of the plan. So community residents, business owners, everyone come together on a game plan that says, this is what we see our community and our town looking like.
Right.
How do we get there? Well,
I think you always have to start with your strengths. And so the first thing you need to do is to figure out who's who here. I look at this as we lost 20,000 manufacturing jobs in the 50s and 60s. That was the wealth creation for this community, was all of those factory jobs. We took labor and we added it to materials, and we created products that could be sold elsewhere to bring money into the city. When we lost that engine of economic development, we kind of stagnated. Then we had two highways that cut through and took a lot of the land that used to have factories on it, and now we have not much land to bring in new businesses, to bring in a big new factory. And we are sort of left with the affordable housing that was there for factory workers. We've become the place where it's, housing prices are the lowest in the state. But that's not really an economic driver. So we need to figure out what's the next economic driver. But in doing so, the first thing we need to do is look at, okay, so what are the economic drivers now? How do we make sure that we keep them and grow them? And then we look at, okay, so what are the other opportunities that we have at hand? But I wouldn't want to go off, chasing the latest, so maybe one could say biomedical, genetic personalized medicine is like the next big new thing, and that we ought to be trying to get in on some of that. Well, maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. But to do that and ignore the fact that we've got small manufacturers in town, places that employ 100, 150 people, who are worried about what's going to happen when Pratt & Whitney starts their new engine line and starts hiring away skilled staff for higher wages in East Hartford or Middletown. We need to be figuring out where's the pipeline that's going to feed those businesses. We have a lot of baby boomers who work in those places who are thinking about retirement, as well as folks who may jump for a $3 or $4 hour raise at Pratt & Whitney. So we have E.C. Goodwin, but E.C. Goodwin isn't that big. We have a much bigger New Britain High School. I'd like to make sure that folks at New Britain High School understand that there are actually good-paying jobs in manufacturing in New Britain. And it's not the dirty, dangerous, noisy stuff that your grandfather worked in. People aren't losing fingers left and right like they used to at Fafner and some of those other places. So we need to make sure that we are training people, connecting people to jobs. I think, pre-apprenticeship programs, things like that where you can earn and learn at the same time. Folks might understand that that's a pretty attractive alternative compared to going into debt to go to a private trade school. That those private trade schools have marketing budgets that may entice you, but if you could get a pre-apprenticeship where you get connected to actual employers and then start working there and go to, as Nantuck or Tunxus for their machining programs, you could actually earn money while you're going to school and already being connected to employers that will pay you a wage.
I like that strategy.
Yeah, so you got to start with your current strengths and then look for ways to build on that. Are there other sort of related businesses to the ones that you're already working with that may be looking to relocate or expand? Can we bring them to New Britain? We're not going to bring a big, Mercedes factory. There's not any space for that. But, we did bring Palmer Aerospace came from Newington under the O'Brien administration. There are other manufacturers in town, in the area who may be looking for places to come to. And we need to, manufacturing is clearly one of those value-added places where, labor plus materials and a production method then produces something of greater value that gets sold. We need to be looking at the higher value-added manufacturing because that's what produces enough value to be able to pay decent wages.
Right now in the town of New Britain, what do you think the most important issues we face? What do you think the most important issues we face right now in the town of New Britain?
There are lots of things that seem pressing immediately, but if you look at it from the sort of 50,000 foot level, the fact that we have not figured out a new reason for a new economic driver for the city that's the underlying problem that results in everything else.
I agree.
So we've got to figure out how is it that we create more jobs for people who live in New Britain.
I definitely agree.
And many of the the economic drivers right now are the hospitals, the university, but a lot of the people who are working at those places don't live in town.
And that's my next question. Why is that, or why do you think that's so? Like these community residents don't have jobs in their own town.
The primary reason is we don't have big factories employing lots of people anymore. That's the reason why folks who are living here are finding it hard to get jobs here. Well, under collective bargaining, we can't have a residency requirement that says, if you're a cop in New Britain, you have to live in New Britain. And that is one of those jobs where it is nice to be able to not always be on. I can understand that. But I think a big reason that city employees in particular, as well as people who are working at the hospital and stuff, aren't living in town is because of concerns about the school district. So people who have a lot of folks who have the wherewithal to move out of town because they think that their kids will get a better education someplace else. Now, I think that the teachers that we have in New Britain do a remarkable job, but we have lots of kids who are facing lots of issues. And, if you take a school district with 80% of the kids qualifying for a free or reduced lunch and you compare it to a school district where 10% of the kids qualify for free or reduced lunch, first of all, you're probably going to find that in the wealthier district, they're spending more per child. And the kids in the poorer district have a lot more needs. You have a lot more kids who have issues with attendance. There's just lots more stuff going on in their lives. It's not just, that the trauma that the kid is facing is that mom and dad split up. It's that, dad got arrested and they, kicked in the door and dragged him away. Or I was up all night because there was a shooting down the street and there were, sirens and stuff and I'm scared to go outside. That's very different than, I didn't get the fanciest new video game for Christmas kind of thing. So I don't know. I guess I give people the benefit of the doubt that I don't think people are intentionally being racist in their hiring practices. Yeah. But I also know that, everybody has implicit biases. And that there may be some, okay, well, this guy showed up 5 minutes late for his interview, not understanding he had to take 3 buses to get here. And that says to me that he's not going to be reliable and, I should hire the other guy who was here sitting, waiting. It's also, that's part of why I think that pre-apprenticeship programs and internship programs get you past that initial difference, and you get to see this young person is actually eager to learn, and then it makes it easier to get those folks into employers here in town. And, it's also you have, let's just say the fire department, for instance. There are a huge number of people who are related to each other within the fire department. Yeah. Because how is it that you learn about being a fireman? Well, because your uncle tells you stories at the family barbecue. How is it when it is you apply? Because it's only certain times. It's when your uncle says, hey, the test is coming up. You better go down and sign up now. It's those kinds of connections that make it, and then it's like, okay, so what's going to be on the test that I have to take? Well, it's your uncle telling you, it's like, well, when I took it, it was this, this, and this.
Do you think that's what almost like everything now? Like, it's like they always say, like, it's who you know now.
Yeah. I mean, there is a degree of who you know in everything. Yeah. And so that's the issue of sort of building your social capital and getting to know people, having people vouch for you, whether it's a first apprenticeship or a first internship, or it's, I remember in college doing research projects where I interviewed business leaders in town. Well, that gave me an exposure to them that I wouldn't have ever had. And I wasn't ever trying to get a job with any of those businesses, but, that kind of getting in the door that lots of other people didn't ever have that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
So, there's a lot of we don't know what we don't know. And I think there's also, on the flip side of it, people who don't know what the business is looking for assume the worst when they don't get hired.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you have, on both sides, there's misunderstanding.
Yeah. How I look at the town now, and I say, yes, I know that we live in a poor town, and I don't believe I don't believe that New Britain is that poor. I don't believe we're just like a poor town. I just believe that we lack opportunity. There's resources out there that a lot of us is uneducated about that we don't know that's out there. I had the opportunity. Well, actually, I went and just found made my own opportunities, and now I'm trying to give that path to the next generation through my program, my kids. But I think that it's opportunity, and if we as a whole in New Britain focus on unity and put together a game plan that politics and the community is involved with, residents, where they have some take or some part in the development of what they're suffering from, what are some of their ideas, and try to build something as a unit. I think that will move us forward faster than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are lots of people in this community who feel locked out of the decisions that are being made about the community. And I really want to bring people together and give them a sense that they've got some input on things, and that we together as a community can build a better New Britain. And I've heard that from lots of different communities, that they feel like the current administration has just kind of locked them out of stuff. I really feel like local government needs to be on the side of residents.
Definitely.
And whether that's, a tenant who is facing a maintenance problem in their building that they can't get the landlord to repair, well, the city health department ought to be on their side citing the landlord for a problem. A resident who's trying to make an improvement in their home, dealing with the city building department ought to be it ought to be helpful, as opposed to feeling like every time I turn they've got another reason to say no.
What is the plan to take New Britain and not only develop it in an economic way, but develop it in a way where these kids have something to do from kindergarten, all the way to high school? Like, is there any vision or plan for that?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why you don't see those programs now is that there's been a substantial withdrawal from supporting those kinds of activities, both from the federal and state governments. The federal government has cut back on community development block grants substantially. That used to be one of those sources of sort of discretionary money that communities could use for that sort of program. And then the state government is going through such a huge budget crisis now that they're cutting everything left and right. And that leaves us with sort of the, okay, how do you fund this stuff? I used to have a quote up on my wall. It was from some British lord or something. It was like, we haven't the money, so we'll have to think. And that is, it's easy to throw money at things. People, that's great. Everybody likes getting money. And you can have everybody happy if you've got money to throw at things. If you don't have money, then we need to figure out, are there other ways to do this? Are there ways that you can connect the budding artist with other people who are interested in that? The spoken word artist who has changed their life through using spoken word art, and use that to inspire other kids to do that. That's not something that takes a lot of money to do. how do we use the resources that we have at the school system? In the high school, we provide small stipends for people to run after-school programs or after-school clubs.
Yeah.
Usually those are teachers. They don't have to be. So, if we had the great spoken word artist who was great with kids, who wanted to do that kind of a program after school with kids at the high school, we could be using that stipend to support that effort. Doesn't have to be an English teacher doing the spoken word project.
Yeah.
Likewise, there are other projects, and then there are also some little pots of money at the various foundations that could fund those sorts of things. The problem is, it's hard to do something that, is going to serve 500 kids when you're talking about patching together small pots of money.
Mm-hmm. And that would also help too with the ideas of the community residents and the kids itself, the youth, coming up with ideas that can be worked on by us.
Yeah, and I think that's the other key part is really asking the youth what they want to do.
Yeah.
Years ago, I remember hearing about American Savings Foundation that was funding after-school programs for middle school kids. And they noticed that the attendance at these programs wasn't particularly great. And so they asked all of their grantees, so explain this. And they got all sorts of stories of, some of our kids have younger siblings they have to watch. And, if mom isn't going to be home from work because she has to work late, they have to go take the little one off the bus and stuff like that. And so after seeing all this, the foundation thought, seems a little bit like excuses. Let's ask the kids. And what they got from the kids was, we want something more meaningful. We want to have stuff where we talk about real stuff. We'd like to learn to cook.
Yeah.
And it was stuff that was completely different than what the program providers were saying. And as a result, the foundation said to the providers, hey, you guys need to incorporate the stuff that the kids said. And make your programs more attractive to them by offering what they want.
Yep. No, I agree. Because they're the future. They're able to come and say, we want a building so we can do this. Like you said, we want a kitchen so we can cook.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of kids out there with great ideas. Even in my legacy program, we have over 200 kids, and they all have great ideas. But it's like, where do we go, to bring your ideas to life, And the community is very, very, very important for the community, no matter what, party you're in, to stick together. Because if we don't move as a unit, then there's really no strong movement,
Mm-hmm.
If right now, I was doing research on like other states and other communities, and you see, you don't see it, on TV or anything, but you have to research, you have to read about it, and you see the movements, you see them coming together, you see them expanding, entrepreneurship, unity, and it's real powerful. And then I look at my town and I say, I'm not here to pack up and leave.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make the place that I come from, great. As far as, so when we're talking about the whole of the community, we don't want to leave no one out. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about different areas, what is the plan or the focus to on the projects? We have Malakowski Circle, we have Mount Pleasant, we have Farmington Hill. We have these areas where some of these kids and these parents, they're suffering a lot.
So you have a whole bunch of different issues that come together. One is the housing stock, because those are public housing projects, making sure that those are decent places to live. Mm-hmm. The second is thinking about, who are the folks there? What are the issues that they're dealing with right now? Is it unemployment because they don't have the skills to get a job? Is it lack of after-school program for the kids? What are the particular things there? I can't say that I've got a great enough knowledge to be able to wave a magic wand and say, it'll all be better. But I understand that that's, places where we have pockets of poverty are places where we need to focus resources. Yeah. And we need to think about how do we, success isn't just that we have provided a service now. It's that we've helped people get to the point where they don't need the service. So, it's like in Head Start, I know people who've worked there for a long time who are, I'm now seeing the grandkids of the kids that I originally had. Yeah. And for a Head Start program which tries to really be sort of a kind of a family, that feels like, oh, I know these people, that's great. Yeah. On the other hand, that means 3 generations of people in poverty who haven't managed to get out. Yeah. And shouldn't the goal be helping those families get out of poverty so that their kids or grandkids don't need Head Start services themselves? Yeah. Because
all it's going to do is the cycle is just going to keep going. Right. Those kids are going to become like their parents, and it's just going to be a never-ending cycle.
So nationally, there's been, and somewhat in Connecticut, there's been work on 2-generation strategies of how do you help both the child and the parent get out of poverty. Mm-hmm. The notion that Head Start was an intervention aimed at the kids, but honestly, how is you can't expect the 3 or 4-year-old to be the one who's going to get the family out of poverty. It's going to be the parent. And yes, providing that Head Start program where the kid can be safe and learning when they're 3 and 4 is a great thing, but without helping the parent get the skills to be able to get a better paying job, the likelihood that that 3 or 4-year-olds kids 20 years down the road are going to be showing up at Head Start are pretty strong.
The exact amount, but the homeless. We see them, downtown New Britain. Yep. Some of them got homes. Some of them don't. Some of them sleep outside. What is our plan? What is our plan for New Britain to help the homeless get shelter?
I mean, I think the most cost-effective and best strategy is to provide permanent housing for those families. Or for those individuals. There is, for years there was a shelter movement of trying to provide shelter to people, and the notion that just providing shelter, shelter is more expensive to provide than the long-term housing. And, I just think that you've got to have the approach that we're using now is rapid rehousing, that as soon as someone is showing up, we're trying to get them into a place to live as quickly as possible to minimize the disruption, because the longer that you're living in a shelter, the more disrupted your life is. Lots of homeless folks are working. And they're just not earning enough to be able to keep a roof over their head. And that says something about the minimum wage is too low. You've got to have an approach that is making sure that we're getting families into permanent housing. Some of those folks need supportive housing, because they're dealing with other, mental health issues or addiction issues, other things going on that require more than a place to sleep. That they need some additional services to help them overcome the issues that they're dealing with. And so supportive housing where there is someone to make sure that people are taking their meds if they're need antipsychotics or something like that. That kind of stuff is much more effective than sort of having them in constant crisis.
Yeah.
Just you think about the amount of money that gets spent in emergency rooms for people who are homeless and diabetic and have substance abuse and mental health issues. I mean, those are the frequent flyers who are at the hospital all the time, who are racking up humongous Medicaid bills.
Yeah.
It is so much cheaper if you look at things holistically and say, okay, so if we can put this person into a safe place where there's somebody there who monitors their health status, we could save a whole lot of money over here on the Medicare side.
Yeah.
But if we just look at it as housing here, healthcare over here, something else over here, we don't realize the full cost of that person, and we don't understand that something that might seem expensive, like providing them with housing, is actually much cheaper.
And I also wanted to ask you, your desire to want to come to the town of New Britain and run for mayor. What inspired you to say, I want to run for mayor in New Britain?
Well, running for mayor was, not anything that I ever thought I was going to do, to be honest. But Donald Trump getting elected was kind of a wake-up call that the country had gone off the rails.
Yeah.
That kind of racism and fascism. I mean, he is somebody who's taken a playbook right out of the fascist dictators of the past, of demonizing particular groups, of sort of attacking the media, sort of the cult of personality. All of those sorts of things make me very anxious about him. And when you look at how the Republicans have taken over so many states, they started at the local level. So first of all, it was the sense that I've got to do more than I've done. I've worked in nonprofits and for good causes for the last 30 some odd years. But just sort of doing good work isn't enough anymore. We need to start to take back the country from what I see as a potentially very anti-democratic, threatening authoritarianism of the Trump administration. And, people need to understand that within the other slate, the Republican slate, there are some people who are very supportive of Trump. And the fact that the mayor hasn't come out and criticized some of the outrageous stuff that Trump, when Trump talked about there are good people on both sides in Charlottesville, I mean, really good people among the KKK? That silence is deafening. Why is it that you can't find it in your leadership to condemn something that's bad, even if it's someone in your own party? In many ways, given, Republicans are heard louder in criticizing their president. Everybody expects the Democrats to criticize him. So when there's really something bad that he's doing, when Republicans stay quiet, they are essentially by default supporting it. So that was one reason. The local budget is another. Budgets are policy documents. They are setting priorities. This year, the school budget is flat funded again. We have a school system that needs to. We need to be more rigorous in our education. We need to get kids to where they need to be.
Fast.
And every year that we're not getting kids to reading at grade level in third grade is another generation or another cohort of kids who are going to struggle in high school. One of the things that I've done on the Board of Ed is to say that we've got to stop watering down our standards. That we use a reading test, the NWEA test.
Mm-hmm.
It reports data out in 5 bands, 5 quintiles.
Mm-hmm.
Up until this year, we had been combining the top 3 quintiles. So success was if you were above the 41st percentile.
Not no more.
Now we are reporting it out on all 5. So you can tell when kids are in the 80th percentile.
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize the kids who are doing really well if they're just lumped in with everybody above the 41st percentile.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to be honest with parents that, your kid's in the 42nd percentile. That's not success. That's just barely getting to success.
Yeah.
And we need to be engaging parents in what they can do to help at home. And, we can't, yes, we know that there are lots of families who are working 2 jobs and, life is harder. But we also need to engage those parents in, here are the things that you should be doing. Like get in the habit of taking your kids to the library on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Books are free there.
Yeah.
Get your kids excited about that as a prospect of, learning to read stuff and reading stories that they enjoy. Taking your kids to a library is a whole lot cheaper and better than taking them, to the video arcade as a treat kind of thing.
So as we wrap it up, because I think we touched almost every topic, I want to ask you, do you get along with the other parties?
Yeah. I mean,
relationship?
We've been cordial. I don't, I don't hate anybody. There's certainly people who I disagree with on issues, but I've always been somebody who gets along with most everybody.